Yeah, okay. We're gonna just be recording this training so we can send it out to folks that weren't able to make it today. Wonderful. Well, hello everyone. I'm gonna start with introducing myself. My name is Ariana Hones, she, her, hers. I'm the Southeast Organizer with Wisconsin Conservation Voters. So I live in West Dallas, but do work all over city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, and other places in Southeast Wisconsin. But Wisconsin Conservation Voters, for those of you that don't know, we're a environmental nonprofit. We do policy work and do elections as well, and have locations in Madison, Western Wisconsin, in Eau Claire, and then also in Northeast Wisconsin in Green Bay. So I'll pass it over to Ted.
Hi, I'm Ted Craig, and I'm a volunteer on climate issues. My day job is I'm a union rep for teachers. I work for an affiliate of WEAC, and I'm heavily involved through Citizen Action of Wisconsin, which, as probably many of you know, is a statewide organization that's been around for decades and works on all kinds of issues, including healthcare and poverty and voting rights and so on. In the past few years, we've gotten heavily involved in climate, especially as it relates to economic justice. So that's my involvement, and I do serve on the city-county task force on climate and economic equity, which is planning major things in Milwaukee City and County.
Awesome, thanks Ted. And Linda, do you want to go?
Hi, I'm Linda Frank, she, her. I am a lawyer, and I am also a member of the Milwaukee City County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity. I was designated by the Sierra Club. And I just mentioned that I'm also on the board of the Milwaukee Area Land Conservancy to do land preservation.
Awesome, thanks. All right, I'm going to share my screen and we will get started with Ted just chatting about why we're here today.
Yeah, and oh, should I start?
Yeah, you can start.
Yeah, so you know, I think a lot of us understand this stuff pretty well. I'll just tell you a little of my story. I first started learning about climate and what we're doing with climate and what the probable implications are back when I was in college. So this is back in the late 1980s, when really the science was becoming completely definitive that human beings were changing the chemical composition of the atmosphere, that it was likely to trigger all kinds of terrible consequences. We knew very well, and it was settled science by that time. And of course, we all know that since that time, very, very little has happened to actually address the issue, despite the scale of the problem, which could be, it likely will be extremely catastrophic if we don't change our ways. And just to give you a sense of it, and you might have heard this statistic before, when the science became settled in about late 80s, since that time, more carbon has been emitted into the atmosphere than had been emitted in the entire history up to that point. So literally, we've doubled the amount of emissions in that short 30-year time period. We've done so little. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that is. One is kind of this: well, people aren't really capable of worrying about something that's in the hazy, distant future, or they get overwhelmed and they feel hopeless and despairing and they're not going to do anything about it. And that's certainly part of the picture, but a much bigger part of the picture is power. It has to do with that very powerful vested interests and status quo interests had enough power to stop us from doing anything. And so obviously, in anything we do, we have to contemplate, how are we going to build the power to create the change? We know what we need to do. How are we going to do it? So flip forward now to 2021, and I think we're seeing some really good news, right? I'm seeing Joe Biden say things about our climate goals that are making my head spin. It's almost outlandish. My God, he wants to do what is necessary. And we've got climate planning going on at the state level under Mandela Barnes's and Governor Evers's leadership. And in Milwaukee City County, as Linda will talk about, we're hatching really big plans to do substantial things about climate on a level that, again, was not contemplated 5-10 years ago. So all that said, the important point is that that planning and the process that's going on in Milwaukee City and County, which is involving dozens, if not hundreds of people, is necessary but not sufficient. It is absolutely necessary to get into the details and figure out how are we going to meet our climate targets and improve racial equity at the same time. but it's not sufficient because those plans can amount to nothing if we don't have the power to make them overcome both entrenched interests and also just a lot of inertia. A lot of people who make decisions about how we travel and how we consume energy and are very committed to business as usual. The great news I just can't emphasize enough is that the Common Council passed a resolution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030 unanimously, and started and is staffing a serious planning process to do it. And the county board passed the same resolution 14-2. So on paper, they're all with us. But as somebody who's on the task force and going through the planning process, I can tell you I'm already seeing political calculation prevent us from considering things that we need to do, things that are very doable, things that are being done in other places. People say, well, you can't do that, it won't pass, you'll get a backlash, so we can't consider these absolutely necessary things. So to me, it's always been clear, it becomes even more clear as we go through the process, that we need to be lobbying our electeds, having relationships with our electeds. They need to know there's a constituency for this, that there's a demand for it, and that they have political support to make these difficult decisions. And that's what this lobbying training is about. We've really got to build the power and build the relationships to make it all happen.
Thanks so much, Ted. Linda, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Linda Frank again. Yeah, so Ted really laid out for us the reason for this session, the reason we invited you all here. You know, in addition to the climate change crisis, the task force has the job of addressing racial inequity. And so although we're familiar with what's going on with climate change, and we really had our attention focused on racism issues recently with the Black Lives Matter activities, and you know, the focus particularly on police violence, but the impacts of systemic racism go well beyond that. So I'm going to take us through this racism issues and climate change issues, but really focused on Milwaukee. So here are some statistics that were cited that tells us how bad the situation is here for racial inequity in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. The first point is that looking at poverty rates for the Black community in Wisconsin, it's triple what it is for the white community. For the Latinx community, it's about double poverty rates for white people. In our Milwaukee zip code 53206, look at the employment rate, 50% for adults in that area, which is predominantly a Black area of the city. So there are going to be lots of green jobs, and already have been green jobs created by climate action. And we need to target those jobs to uplifting those living in poverty, particularly the Black community and other communities of color. And that kind of targeting is called for in the resolution creating the task force. The other issues that need to give priority to our disadvantaged communities are the lack of access to healthy food, green spaces, trails, transit, safe housing, and healthy air quality. So bottom line, with all solutions, impacts and solutions that we're looking at, we need to ask ourselves first, how is this affecting the Black communities and the low income communities in our city and in our county, and make sure that we're giving priority to solving those problems in those areas. Next slide. So I'm gonna give an overview on climate change in terms of impacts, causes, and the solutions and benefits. So the first topic is the impacts of climate change. And let me just ask you, as we're going to talk about this, have you been personally affected by any climate impacts? Well, the most destructive situation has been the rash of wildfires and hurricanes in other parts of the country. Okay, I heard a little sound that was not part of the presentation here. But in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin, we have other impacts, and that includes flooding. I don't know if you've been impacted by flooding, but there's going to be more extreme weather of all kinds, and that includes more extreme storm events, so more flooding with that, and extreme drought and heat events as well. Next slide. So the one of the things that might be personally affecting you and really affects a lot of people is asthma, because the burning of fossil fuels that causes atmospheric greenhouse gases and climate change also is causing pollution. And that really has, so according to the statistics here, since 1980, rates of asthma in children have doubled. And so the burning of fossil fuels makes the asthma worse. And then as the climate changes, we have more heat and humidity, and that makes it makes it even worse in the future. Yeah, this is really serious for some people. Heat waves. I don't know if heat waves have been a concern to you, but I bet you've noticed it, because I sure have. We're having more 100-degree days, and on the other side of it, we've also had extreme cold because of the polar vortex impact that is bringing that extreme cold weather over here. Well, the heat wave impacts are worse in urban areas like Milwaukee, because we have all these buildings, concrete, and it's not as bad in forested or prairie areas, rural settings, but in the city, we really feel the heat, and it tends to be worst in those areas that of low income and where minorities are living, because they tend to have less tree cover, fewer green spaces. And the next slide. So before I look at the causes of climate change, I want to mention that the leader of the outreach group of the task force, Jennifer, starts public engagement by asking, do you care about these issues? So I'm going to ask you, do you care about climate change and systemic racism? But actually, I know that you do, because that's why you're here and you joined us today.
I do.
But let me ask you another related question. Why do you care? And, I don't always think about this, but, it's a good question to ask. And we're going to explore more of our own stories when Ariana talks to us about this in her presentation. But, why do you care? Have you suffered the climate impacts? Are you scared? for yourself, how it's going to affect you, for your children and grandchildren. I know many people are. I don't tend to react that way myself, but I respect that, empathetic response to it. Maybe you're angry, or sad, you know. We're looking at what we've done and what's not being done to correct it. So, something to keep in mind as we look at climate change and racism. So the causes of climate change, what I'm showing you here is coming from the greenhouse gas inventory that was prepared for the first time, in the context of the task force starting to address climate in Milwaukee. So inventory was performed, and it showed us we have 3 main causes of climate change. One that we see in the middle is our power plants. How is our electricity generated? The burning of coal and gas is causing emissions. On the left, you see buildings, because our buildings are inefficient in the use of electricity. The more electricity that's drawn, the more we have emissions. And we're also burning natural gas for our heat. That's a really serious cause of emissions. And then the third main cause over on the right, of course, transportation, and diesel burning and gasoline burning to get ourselves from one place to another. Next slide. So now to look at the climate solutions and benefits. So first of all, our utility has to change the way that that electricity is generated, by closing coal plants, and not getting doing solar energy and wind turbines, of course, on a large scale. And they have made commitments to start doing that. The second one is with our buildings. We need to have new construction that is up to very, the highest low energy building code standards. And we need to work on our existing buildings, our homes, our apartment buildings, shops, commercial buildings, the large apartment buildings, etc. We need to get into all of those buildings, do energy audits, and weatherize them, use efficient appliances, etc. And the next. On the transportation side, the more that we can use bikes and walking, of course, that's ideal. So we need to have bike and pedestrian friendly infrastructure, and use of public transportation instead of each of us driving our own vehicles. Those are some major ways to address transportation, but also switching to electric vehicles. And next. So there are benefits to addressing the climate crisis, and that is all of the clean or green jobs to be created, especially those jobs are being created in the fields of electrical, heat and air conditioning systems, forestry and landscaping. building inspections and weatherization. And the next slide. So another climate strategy is increasing our cover of trees. And we are talking about a goal of increasing. In fact, the city has had the goal to increase our tree cover to 40% from the 26% that we currently have. Landscaping and green infrastructure. All of these changes beautify our city, but they're also reducing flooding and heat impacts and giving us healthy green space and, you know, wildlife habitat for birds, pollinators, and so on. In the next slide. So to wrap up this part of the presentation, the task force was created and has been working and is starting to come out with its solutions and starting to plan events with the public. And now is the time to get behind the recommendations that are coming out from the task force, as Ted was pointing out. So next slide. Again, the task force is creating a roadmap to how we get to 45% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Also recommending apprenticeships and other workforce development in green jobs, targeting those to communities of color and low income communities. And there we are, you know, working at having a pretty good framework for this by the end of the year. So now's the time to weigh in on it. Thanks.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, go for it, Ted.
Yep, I'll pick it up from here, and I'm just going to talk very briefly about our targets, so to speak. As I mentioned already in the process, we're seeing people feel like there's political constraints that don't have to do with achieving the goals. So the need to be in touch with our electeds is critical. Democracy should be simple. You know, we elect people who have the power to make laws and rules and to tax and spend. And why can't we just elect these people? They all agree with us and they do the job. But we all know power works in more mysterious and less transparent ways than that. So to break it down, there's really two levels of government we're looking at. The first level and the level probably with the most power to do what we want to see as far as racial justice and climate justice is the municipal level. The city of Milwaukee obviously is the largest entity in our county. I believe it's about 2/3 of the population, and has a great deal of power over a lot of the particulars that matter. They can zone and make rules about what can be built where. They can enforce building codes actually at the state level. A lot of that is dictated as far as building codes, but the city plays a major role in that. They have a lot of decisions about infrastructure spending and how the infrastructure is built, and so on. So there's a lot of, in the common council level is where a lot of the action is as far as getting what we want to see as far as the recommendations coming from the city county task force. And then the other level, and I'm kind of at the legislative levels, is the Milwaukee County Board. And you may know the county has substantially less power and budget than the city does. So for example, the county doesn't have the ability to create these TIFs and TIDs, which actually generate like $1 billion worth of investment in Milwaukee. But and the county is financially strained tremendously just with all kinds of obligations for programs they have to administer and not enough budget for the things like, you know, our county parks and so on. But where the county plays a major role is really in three areas. One is the county is responsible for our transportation right now, our public transportation, MCTS. The county controls the vast majority of the open land in the area, the vast majority of parkland and the like, and there's a major role in terms of sequestering carbon and so on, as Linda's talked about. And then third, the county can play a leadership role in getting more municipalities to become part of the climate planning and climate action. And that's a major thing because there's a third of the county that are all these other municipal governments, and some of them are doing something on climate and others aren't, and the county can play a role in really leading the way there. And then you have the executive branch for both levels of government, and these are critical for a lot of reasons. The mayor in Milwaukee basically proposes the initial budget, has a lot of power what comes out of the budget process as far as where the resources goes. The mayor has appointments to really crucial entities that plan what we're doing as far as our transportation and our settlement patterns and so on, like appointments to the sewer PAC, the Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. And the mayor just generally plays a leadership role that is very powerful in Milwaukee and really critical. And the county executive plays kind of a parallel role where a lot of the action is at the county executive level. So for example, some of us are working to get more municipalities to make clean climate action commitments. And one of the first things we heard back from people at that level is, well, where's the county executive who's going to talk with us and provide leadership at that level? So it's also really critical to influence these executive branches as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ted. All right, I'm going to take it from here. I just want to say I do have a dog in the home. He sometimes barks, so hopefully he won't as I'm talking, but sorry if he does. I'll have to go get him. So I am going to talk now about lobbying and how we tell our stories to create change. So the first thing I want to go over is just like a couple things that are important to remember when lobbying, especially lobbying our local electeds. So the first is that your elected official should know how much you care about clean energy, how much you care about climate action, how much you care about equity, and that you're paying attention. You're paying attention to committee meetings, you're paying attention to bills that are going to be voted on, and that you're going to hold them accountable to doing something. I think that, in all of the different ways that I've been working with local government over the past few years, although it's so important to get as many voices as possible to the table and advocating, it holds a lot of weight for a few really concerned individuals to come forward to their local electeds, right? Even if it's 5 people making a phone call to their common council member, that can carry a lot of weight, right, at the end of the day. So it's so crucial, right, and critical that we have folks like you all, connecting with your local electeds and letting them know that you're paying attention, that you want them to take action. A key piece of this, right, when building that relationship is sharing that story, the story of why you're here, just as Linda was saying, right, why you're here and why you care about racial justice, about environmental justice, and that you are ready to invest in that relationship, right, and ready to invest in connecting your local elected to resources or to gaps that they're seeing, and that you're gonna put some pressure on them when it comes time to actually vote and fund things, especially related to climate action. So I might have Linda or Ted jump in here as well, but there's gonna be a couple of things over the next few weeks, months that we are hoping to get started when talking to our county board supervisors or common council members. The first is asking your representative to share the Education and Outreach Committee's community video survey with their constituents. This is also a video survey that you all are welcome to take. I'm going to be following up via email, and I'll also drop it in the chat in a little bit. So you'll be able to see that survey. Essentially, it goes through a couple of questions about climate action in Milwaukee, pretty user-friendly, but we want more people to be participating in that. We want more feedback, especially for the City County Task Force. The second ask is asking your representative to support using federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan to fund climate and equity initiatives. As Linda was saying, the City County Task Force over the next few months, as we near the end of 2021, will be putting forward their final recommendations and what they want to see the Common Council and the County Board take action on. But as of right now, we have pieces of it, but not the full package. So this is what we're doing in the meantime, is asking that those dollars that are coming from the federal level be used in support of climate and equity initiatives. I did want to pause here and see if Ted or Linda, do you have thoughts on, I know that there was something coming out on Tuesday, proposals that were coming out. Do you want to talk about that right now?
Sure, I'll talk very briefly about it. With the American Rescue Plan money, the city is getting 400 million and change. I hear different numbers, but that's a lot of money. Some of it will backfill budget shortfalls, that were caused by the pandemic, but basically there's resources available to do more. And what it can be used for is fairly broad. So both the mayor and the common council are trying to have a very open, transparent process for how that money is spent. And at this point, given it's a lot of money and could do a lot of good, we can really be doing some advocating for that expenditure to go to do something serious about reducing racial inequality and achieving climate goals. So on Monday, there's actually a session that the Common Council is holding. And then on May 27th, there's something similar going on. And it would be really great. We'll send you information on it if you can show up. And I believe there'll be a public comment type period where you can, take 60 seconds to say, look, this is where we think, you should prioritize the money in the immediate future would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I want to add to that. As Ariana was saying, there is a document coming out on Tuesday, well, late in the day, apparently on Tuesday. So the task force it has put together a 5-point request for the spending of those funds. And to give you an idea, the first one is about addressing energy burden, which means, a high proportion of your income is going to pay your utility bill. So yeah, the idea behind that one is to have a financing system through your utility bill to help with the cost of doing efficiency improvements. So the second one, what is the second one? It's important, but it's short. I don't know if you can think of what it is, Ted.
There's the urban forestry.
Yeah, so third one, let me address that because that's the one I was directly involved with. The third one is about funding for removing excess payment that's really causing the heat island effect here, and so it would cover planting of trees and landscaping and green infrastructure. So then a fourth item is about transportation and also working on the rails. I mean, rails to trails, or the trail system, adding to the trail system. And then, I wish I could remember that second one, but.
Well, the new modular home idea.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Low energy or zero energy. There's a specific proposal for building some new affordable housing that would be no or low energy. Actually happens to be a panelized way of manufacturing housing.
Yes, thank you both Ted and Linda. So that was a lot of information, but we will be sending it to you all in a condensed version. I just wanted to have them explain a little bit more detail about those federal dollars and to say that if you're interested in advocating, which we hope that you are, we will definitely be providing you with more resources and more information as soon as it comes out. We're just waiting for that Tuesday report. And in the meantime, of course, you can be attending those meetings that are being put forward by the Common Council on how to use federal dollars. So I'll continue there. We can definitely, if there's questions on this, we can ask those at the end. So to continue on about lobbying your local elected, again, this can look many different ways. One of the things we're going to be talking about today is setting up constituent meetings with your alder or county board supervisor, whoever is representing you at the local level, in terms of, a virtual meeting or in-person meeting eventually, that kind of thing. But there's lots of ways that we can be doing this. So emailing or calling, something to just begin building that relationship. But when it comes time to have recommendations be voted on, what really is so important is to be writing or giving in-person testimony. This can be so powerful. I've been in spaces before. Sometimes they're related to climate action, sometimes they're not. And, we have no idea how the bill is going to go, if it's going to get voted on, but then we have 10 or 12 community members show up and give really powerful in-person testimony. And it is so helpful in getting those bills forward and getting them pushed through. So definitely that personal story that happens in in-person testimony and that call to action is critical, especially when dollars are being put behind an initiative. And then, of course, always asking your personal network to also show up and speak out. We're so excited that all of you are here today. And I think that there is definitely power in reaching out to our networks and inviting them into telling their stories and into thinking about the environment. That's one of the reasons why I think that this work is so powerful, is that we all might define the environment in different ways, but we're all connected to it. And we all have a story to share about it. So that makes, this issue such a strong one to advocate for. So now we're getting into telling stories to create change, and what will eventually be hopefully doing constituent meetings with our local electeds. I wanted to just give a little context of why we tell our stories. And studies have shown that the more facts and data that we collect on an issue can often widen cultural divide on that issue. And that, not to say that facts and data don't matter, because I think they definitely do, but that sometimes they can only go so far, especially if people are not on the same page, right? I think that if I am someone that is an active, climate activist, I love facts and data about climate change. But I think if I'm someone that is on the fence or doesn't fully understand why we need to care about it, what really matters is talking about our personal experiences and establishing a common set of values of, hey, we both care about our community, right? So how does this connect to the fact that, you're my neighbor and that you have kids or whatever it is? And that oftentimes the opinions that we form are based on our value set. So we can tell these stories to our friends and our family. In this case, we can tell them to our legislators, our local electeds, but we can also tell them in a letter to the editor or on social media, which we can also, again, talk about more. But our emphasis today will be on this second point, our legislators. So when thinking about sharing our story, I think it's really important to remember that everyone has a compelling story to tell. But it often requires a little bit of introspection of like, oh, why do I care about this thing? Which is exactly to Linda's question at the beginning. And I think it's important too in these meetings, right, or even in this training session today, that it doesn't have to be something that's like deeply personal, but rather it's the stories that shape our public life, right, our public facing life, and why we're showing up. And so some questions that I often am asking myself, or I ask other people in training sessions, what I'll ask you today is, how and why did you come to hold the values that you do? What were the circumstances, the place that you were at, the smell, the colors? I think that getting creative with how we tell our stories often draws and invites more people in. And it helps paint a picture of our lives and who we are. I think especially when we're in front of local electeds or any elected official or anyone we don't know, it's really important to humanize ourselves and say, hey, yeah, I'm a community member just like you, and this is something that's happened to me, right? This is my story. And key to this, because we often don't have infinite time to sit down with whoever we're lobbying to, is focusing on a specific choice moment. So when did you first care about fighting for the environment or fighting for equity? You know, what was that moment where you're like, oh, okay, I need to get involved, right? So key elements of this story are character. You know, like I said before, we empathize naturally with shared morals, values, and experiences. So talking about, you know, who you are and, you know, about your story and how you're centered in that. Also describing the challenge. What were the different circumstances that were challenging your values and, you know, kind of calling you into that action moment. And then, of course, talking about that choice, right? Why you took the path that you did, why you decided to show up in this space today or take climate action seriously in your community. And then the outcome, of course, what was kind of the finale of that challenge and of that choice moment. And then when we end, especially with our lobbying meetings, when we're in front of a local elected or any elected official, we always want to ask them to take action. And when we're at the beginning of a relationship with our local elected, if you haven't, you know, had a lot of conversations with them, or maybe it's your first conversation with them, the ask will be different depending on, you know, where we're at, what are the needs for climate action and equity, but also how well you know that person. But we always want to still end with an ask. So like we described today, that ask is, will you share this, you know, video survey with your constituents to ask more people to participate? Will you advocate for federal funding for climate and equity initiatives? Those are both, you know, things that they have to say yes or no to, but they're also ones that are not, you know, hey, will you give thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for this specific item, which we will be doing later on down the line when recommendations go forward from the task force. So I'm going to share my.
I just want to. Before we get to the fun part there, yeah, I just want to say that I don't know how you all feel, but I think these asks are really great. They're really specific and easy. I mean, it's going to be easy it should be easy for the representatives to say yes to number one, share the video. And that will really help get the word out. And number two, maybe not as easy, but at least it's really specific. You know, ask them to support what the task force is recommending for the federal rescue funds. So thank you for that, Ariana.
Yeah, thanks. And I did want to add, one of the things that we discussed on Thursday that our other presenter who couldn't be here today, James Davies, brought up is, you know, often it's important too to think about who your local elected is, or any elected official that you have, and what their background is, and see if there's things that you can find that you have in common. One of the things that James brought up was one of his representatives also is a parent. And so oftentimes when he's advocating, they don't often agree on things, but when they do, you know, when they're talking about things, he'll bring up, hey, we both have kids, right? That's our common factor that connects us, and maybe we can find some sort of agreement on a couple of things related to having kids. So I think that that's always a really great thing to keep in your mind when talking to your local elected, and even, you know, afterwards being like, okay, I'm going to note this for next time, that they really care about, you know, pollination, or they really care about a more bike-friendly city, or whatever it is, or this is their work background, their professional background, because that can go a long way. And again, building that relationship. So with that in mind, we're going to have a little bit of time to practice telling our story. No one is obligated to share it with the group. I'm going to share my story first, but I do think one of the really important pieces to this work is practicing. And I think that sometimes it can be like, oh, we're good, we don't need practice. But no, we do need to practice, because every time we tell our story, we can, you know, craft it a little bit differently, tell a different version and also figure out, okay, what are the parts that I really want to empathize, and what are the parts that, oh, maybe I don't have time to talk about this. So again, I'll tell my story first, and then we'll have like about 5-ish minutes to practice writing your story, and then we'll share. And again, if you don't want to share, that's totally okay. You can just write it down. That's great too. So I'll begin with my story. So I grew up in Ripon, Wisconsin, which is about an hour and a half away from here. And I grew up on a little hobby farm, and spent a lot of my childhood jumping on a trampoline. And my mom always made me go collect eggs from our chicken coop. And sometimes I would wake up on Saturday mornings and my parents would be butchering chickens outside. And I thought it was really gross. I was not a fan. But one of the things that my parents did almost as soon as we moved to that community when I was 9 years old, is we had a back 13 acres that had been cornfield, and alfalfa. And so my parents decided to convert that back 13 acres into prairie that was native to Wisconsin. So they partnered with the DNR and they transformed that back 13 acres into native prairie and also planted 700 oak trees. And this was a really interesting moment when I think about my own call to environmental activism. In the moment, I didn't think about it very much. I just was like, oh, this is something my parents are doing. But now when I look back, I think a lot about how that served as a metaphor of very much, I think, a value that my parents instilled in both myself and my brothers, which is we have a responsibility to plant seeds that we will never see that full tree, right? The trees right now, oak trees grow really slow. They're not that tall, even 15 years later. And yet, right, my parents wanted to do that. And that was their value, is let's invest in this 13 acres. That's all we have, control over in this big wide world that's making all of these different changes. But this is something where we can have influence. This is something where we can create meaningful change. So now when I think about my work as an environmental activist, I think about, what can I be doing in my own backyard? And even if I can't control all that's happening, at the international level, at the federal level, even at the state level, what can I be doing in my community? When Linda was talking about heat waves, we just found out there was a report a couple of weeks ago that said that West Allis, the community that I live in, is the hottest city in Wisconsin. So has the most amount of days, that are of extreme heat. It has made me really think about, what can we be doing in West Allis and what can we be doing to take climate action at the hyper local level, which is why myself and an alder person here in West Allis are putting forward a clean energy resolution that will hopefully be voted on in a few weeks. So this is all to say that I think when, thinking about my own story, my own call to action is, again, going back to my parents and going back to that 15-acre farm and asking myself, what can I be doing for a future I might not see? And what can I be doing in my own backyard, right? And with my neighbors and with other community members, which is why I'm so excited that y'all are here today, because that's exactly what we're asking ourselves to be doing and inviting more people into. So I'll end there. That's the story. And if there's questions, we can ask them now. Otherwise, we'll have just 5 minutes to quietly reflect and talk about your own story, your own call to action. And yeah, does that sound good to folks? Cool. I will keep this screen up, the draft your story, just so you can see it. And I'll put like 3-4 minutes on the on my timer and call us back in a few moments, and I'll stop recording as well. and share my screen. And we have, yep, just 2 more slides to get through. All right, let's see if I can get this going. Current slide. All right, so we've just practiced our ask. And I will send this again in a follow-up email. But if anyone doesn't know who represents you, this is a great website, myvote.wi.gov. That's the same place if you requested an absentee ballot or looked up your clerk. That's where you find a lot of information on elections and elected officials. So it's a full list. You type in your zip code or address, and then you'll get from President Biden all the way down. So you'll just have to scroll to the bottom to find out your more local electeds. And we practiced our story. So we will be connecting in the future with you all about if you're interested in setting up a constituent meeting. And at that point, we would just love to know who your representatives are so we can make sure that we're connecting you with other people that might have the same representative. Or we're making sure that we get everybody, we're talking to all the different local electeds. But in the meantime, we would love if you are interested in joining our team to set up lobbying meetings with your local electeds. We'll be sending out a form, like a Google form, pretty short, that just asks you a few questions on how you're interested in participating moving forward. And again, happy to always answer questions if you'd like more clarity on that. We also invite you to attend a task force meeting. The task force meets fairly regularly, and they have a lot of different committee meetings as well. So if you're interested in attending one of those that cover specific topics, we will pass you along that calendar as well. And you're welcome to join those meetings to learn more. And again, there's always more ways you can be participating. So writing an op-ed about funding for climate and equity, or taking the education outreach video survey, which I'll drop in the chat in a moment. So lots of ways to participate. And again, we would love any questions or thoughts at this point in time, but wanted to just thank you all for sharing your stories and practicing those stories. It can be really vulnerable. And I love hearing them. It just reaffirms why this work is so important. I do this work all the time, and sometimes I'm like, oh no, I'm the only person that cares. And it's not true. So it was so great hearing everyone's stories and why you're involved. It was really powerful for me. I'll stop sharing at this point, and have time for questions if there are any.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If we are on the group that talks to the representatives, what do you call it when you go there in person? Anyway, would we have to back the whole program that they have, or could we give our own opinions, or how would that work? Would we be just like citizen promoters of their program? Because that's what I don't want. I'd rather be able to just give my own personal opinions.
Yeah. Yes. So that's a great question. So moving forward, like we said, there's going to be a lot of different recommendations coming out, and the timeline is sort of fluid on when that will happen. But I think the first one is just setting up that relationship, beginning to have a conversation about climate action and equity. And I think that for all of this, your, personal thoughts and your, what you're really passionate about, I think is definitely something that you can speak to, with like specificity of this is something I'm really, I really care about and I'm really interested in.
For example, I am surrounded, I live on 31st Street. I'm surrounded by empty buildings. There's one block where all the buildings are empty, and down the street I think there's an old hospital which is empty, but I'm not sure, maybe they have something in it now. But some of these buildings have been empty for 8 years that I've lived here, and I personally think something should be done about that before building more buildings. I think the empty buildings, they should get taxes from the LLCs that hold these buildings for years on end. they should do something to get more money for the city for justice issues, rather than allowing outsiders to hold our land hostage when people need places to live. Instead of building more houses, why not insist? And this is more environmentally, to me, being save the old buildings, remake them into houses if they're not good the way they are, make them into new apartments, use whatever money you have to remake what we already have, instead of allowing outside interests to whatever their future plan is for Milwaukee. It isn't the plan of the people. It's the plan of unknown entities with lots of money who don't even care whether their buildings have anything going on. Meanwhile, we have them surrounding us. So that's the type of thing I'd like to talk about.
Could I just ask you, you're talking about commercial buildings?
Both commercial and rental. It's all empty around here. 31st and Michigan is where I live. Now the apartment building, due to a fire, now that whole apartment building is empty. It used to have people in it, kitty corner from where I am. They just keep moving out, and they don't fill them up, a lot of these buildings. They hold on to them for years. They take care of them on the outside for who knows what purpose.
Yeah, I mean, if I could weigh in on that, and I think you and I talked about this over the phone, that is fascinating. I didn't even know some of this, although I'm not surprised. You know, I think if you can connect the story to kind of the goal as far as reducing emissions and increasing racial equality and economic opportunity, then I think that's great, because everything you're talking about, like we talked about on the phone, is consistent with what needs to be happening for climate, right? We need people, we need infill, right? Rather than more, you know, suburban sprawl. We have a crisis with not enough affordable housing for people. And all these things, you know, the goals of like what we're working on here very much fit with what you're talking about, right? I mean, revitalizing the city and making it more dense and more walkable and more, you know, fit better with public transit and so on. What you're talking about, I think, absolutely hits the nail on the head. It'd be good just to explicitly connect it with like the broader thing that we're lobbying for as far as climate and racial equity, in my opinion.
So it's okay if I say that?
Yeah, I think so. Now, some of where you go, I mean, we talk about this before going to a meeting, like if we're, you know, I guess it's like who's doing this and what are their motives is a really good question. You know, in my mind, a lot of it needs to be like, for the electeds, it needs to be seen like as an opportunity for them, right, that they'll benefit from, right? Like, you know, Alderman Bauman, this is your district, you'll benefit if like there's a lot more people coming to live here, right? And they can afford the housing better. And you know what I mean? I would probably frame it a little more positively, would be my suggestion. But I do think it fits with what we're talking about. We're trying to get more dense, affordable housing and more kind of walkable, bikeable neighborhoods that fit with public transit rather than use of personal vehicles. And so I do think it fits as part of the picture. Just need to make it clear that it is part of the picture for people. That's my feeling.
Okay.
Thank
you, everybody. This has been pretty informative and good. Thanks a lot for sharing all this great information.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
you.
Are there any other questions? I think we have about a couple more minutes left. Any other final thoughts? If, as you're thinking, I also just dropped in the chat a couple of links. So there is, the first one is to the video survey that you all are welcome to take. And then our follow-up Google form, just asking how you'd like to participate moving forward. And then finally, those town halls that Ted was talking about, in terms of the American Rescue Plan spending in Milwaukee, there's a link to register, and that one is on Monday. I'll follow up in an email as well with this information, but just wanted you to have them if you want to see them right now.
And
yeah, any other
Ariana,
if
you know, if we're going to close the meeting right now, I'm just going to suggest that maybe you like keep the meeting open for a minute or two after we conclude in case people want to get those links
Yeah.
copied right away?
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, feel free to open those right now and I'll send them in a link too, or an email as well. Any other final questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you all. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your stories, for showing up today. My email, I'll drop it in the chat right now as well, is ariana@conservationvoters.org. Feel free to send me an email and I can connect you with Linda and Ted, but we'll definitely be reaching out moving forward about lobbying meetings and ways that you can participate. But yeah, just wanted, again, thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. We really loved having you all here.
And we had the question about whether these links would be sent by email.
Yep, and they will be, yep. Yeah, so I will follow up. Yes, I'll follow up soon with the links to the email. And then once we get those recommendations on Tuesday about American Rescue Plan funding, I can send you those as well, those 5 points that Linda was talking about, just so you can see them for your information.
Yeah, this is a really great group. Was good being with you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Yeah,
all.
thank you very much.